When you think you need to have all the answers, the listening ears come off. People were on edge and just not even talking about how many customers did you have today. It was about how are you? What can we do to help? And I think that's when not the light bulb went off, but that's when I realized this isn't just about business. This is a people oriented world and business that happens to operate within it. What I have learned is it actually helps when you show some humbleness, when you show some vulnerability, because your teams will, I think, even respect you even more and trust you even more and probably give you even more to perform.
Welcome to the Spirituality in Leadership podcast. I'm Andrew Cohn. Spirituality in Leadership is a platform for conversations with leaders at all levels about bringing our spiritual dimensions to our leadership, our teams, our workplaces, and all areas of our lives in order to achieve greater success and fulfillment and build and sustain healthier organizations. If you'd like to connect with me to talk further about these topics and or about individual or team coaching, leadership workshops, or team alignment, please go to my website, lighthouseteams.com. Enjoy the podcast. In this episode of the podcast, I'm so pleased to have with me Zeta Smith. Zeta is a business leader in the U.S. She has been a CEO, GM, COO, member of global executive teams for global service organizations. And she's quite experienced and wise in areas of leadership, but also with a real keen sense of leading people. And so this conversation is a wonderful intersection between her personal experience about leadership and leadership lessons, and also what effective leadership looks like. She talks about leading through crisis situations, including the Boston Marathon bombings, and leading through COVID in an organization whose mission was to support healthcare of seniors and vulnerable populations. And it's a very practical and inviting conversation about what works, what helps get the most of people, what helps us listen and lead, demonstrate caring, and ultimately just be more effective as leaders. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome back to the podcast. I am so pleased to have with me Zeta Smith from the wonderful state of Maryland, the East Coast US, Mid-Atlantic region. And you and I met some years ago when you were in a very senior leadership role, and we've just kept in touch since then. And I've always thought that you'd be a great guest for this podcast. So thank you for making it happen, and welcome to the podcast, Zeta.
Thank you. My pleasure. I'm excited to have a conversation with you, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. So a question that I like to ask to begin these conversations is what kind of draws you to this topic? I think I have a sense of what it is for you. We've had some conversations, but this intersection of leadership and practical, effective leadership and things that might be called spiritual, and people define that in different ways. For you, what draws you to this topic and what's the connection for you?
Yeah, I think when I think about just leadership in the workplace, it's a lot more than just numbers and outcomes. There's usually another layer, and we can call it, purpose or mission or values. And for me, when you reached out to kind of say, hey, can we have a discussion about it? I said, absolutely, because I knew for me personally, I've evolved. It was always just about the results. And then realizing that there are layers around how do you lead people, finding the meaning in what you're doing, feeling like it's something bigger than yourself and why you do what you do. So I certainly was interested to have that conversation with you.
So you talked about evolution and evolution as a leader. So I'd love if you could share a bit about your background. You can go back as far as you choose to go, but I'd love to hear some about how you've evolved as a leader, what leadership means for you in the way we're talking about it.
Thank you. You know, I've been around a bit and I've worked for large companies with large portfolios and smaller portfolios. And it really always came down to people. but I do remember starting my first job, and it was really all about, the numbers. And I even had a license plate that said all business, and I was proud of that. ALLBZNS. And I was
Love it.
proud of it, like, this is how I am, this is how I operate, and it was, working for an energy company, male dominated, and so there was a piece that was just kinda emphasizing kind of results and drive, etcetera, and you don't lose that, and that kinda has been me inherently. However, as you go through, your career and you work for different people and you work for different companies and different sizes and resources and scrappy, etcetera, you realize there's more to it than just business, that there are people behind those numbers, and how do you lead them to bring their best selves to work? And my first job at this oil company, I was a marketing representative. I had 26 franchisees in North Jersey. They were all white men. Average age was about 50. I was just out of college, young Black female. Uh, the tenure of those franchisees was about 20 years. And I had to
Wow.
come on to this gasoline lot. That's when it was more at gas stations with bays and mechanics. And I had to counsel them on pricing strategy, as well as selling oil to them. And what I learned very quickly is you create trust as quickly as you can. And you do that by building trust by actually doing the job, following up, communication, creating clarity around what my role is, what the expectations of you as my client is, and then following up, and then rewarding and recognizing. And through that, I learned and applied that same concept over the years in many of the teams that I have led. And I realized again that it wasn't just about the numbers, but it's the how you lead people to then have them understand, hey, my work does matter. You do see me. And in essence, many then began to work even harder because they understood, hey, this is bigger than me. And I think that's where this purpose driven leadership comes in.
Mm. Well, you just put a lot on the table right there. Um, but I love that experience that you shared. So there, these guys and their guys, are in their roles for 20 plus years. I'm picturing you there, as you said, you're young. You don't look like these guys do, or their daughters do, but they probably have daughters your age. And their average tenure is 20 years. What was the average tenure of someone in your role, I wonder?
That's a good question. I came out of a management trainee program. There were very few of us coming out, and I would say my peer group at that time, I was the youngest. I think the average age probably was mid-30s, early 40s. So,
Mm,
my peer group was older, and certainly my client base was older, and I
mhm.
was the only one that looked like me.
And so what drew you to that oil company, that natural resources company? And I know what it is, but what
Yeah.
drew you to that? Like, what got you there?
Yeah, I had interviewed, uh, at campus. I went to University of Maryland, College Park. I was practicing interviewing at a career center, and Mobile Oil, which I'll mention, came on campus, and I had never even heard of them, and, sat down for an interview just to practice, and it kind of progressed into that. But what I will say is there was value placed on, what I brought to the table in that interview. They saw something in me, that they thought was going to be a good fit. I liked the aspect of it was a large company, a lot of opportunity to grow, to develop, and to learn. So that was my motivation.
Nice, and you were there for 15 years,
I was
if
there
I
for
recall
15
correctly.
years. Yeah.
So, wow, okay, very cool. So, and then from there, you moved on to a very well-known another company. You could tell what you want to talk about, but if you could share a little bit about your leadership journey, and I know we've talked about how there were a couple of episodes through the course of your leadership that were really like there was for all of us. But I'd love to hear yours, of course, with respect to, what helped you. I mean, what do I want to say? You use the word evolution. So how has your leadership evolved? And right now you're in very senior role territory, and the way you talk about leadership is super attractive to me, which is what drew me to you and continues to.
Yeah.
But if you could talk about how your leadership evolved, maybe there are some stories to tell, or just something a little bit more general. The more specific, the better. I always find.
Yeah. No, thank you. I think um it's been an evolution because you have experiences that then evolve you. And I think leading through crisis is one of those examples. And when you're leading multi-unit businesses, and that's been my whole career, that involves people, that involves customers, that involves clients, and the unexpected. And so when I went to Starbucks, and I'll say the company, there were quite a few crises that occurred. And I would say just overall with crisis management, because I experienced it with the DC sniper at ExxonMobil and unfortunately many crises with Starbucks. It becomes more about your head and heart when you're leading. So when a crisis happens, you're quick to think about logistics and what happens to the business and all of those things. Um, but the heart then needs to speak, caring about the people, what has happened, uh, creating a safe space so people can actually function and not be paralyzed. And as an example, unfortunately, one of the stores was in the middle of the 2 bombs, in the Boston Marathon, and obviously a traumatic and sad event for everyone involved, but we had partners that were working there. We had partners, slash employees, that were witness to a lot of, very traumatic, activities there. And I remember literally a day or 2 after being on the ground in Boston, downtown, walking the streets with some of my leadership team, talking to employees. We had closed down some stores, people were on edge, and just not even talking about, how many customers did you have today? It was about, "How are you? What
Mm.
can we do to help?" Um, and I think that's when the not the light bulb went off, but that's when I realized this isn't just about business. This is a people this is a people-oriented world and business that happens to operate within it. And so being able to go into these stores and talk to people and creating this safe space, I do think mattered. And in fact, you know, after, things tried to normalize, I did hear from a lot of team members to say, "Hey, thank you. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for caring." And I think all of that then shapes you to say, people then understand, "Hey, it's larger than me. I'm gonna work harder. I feel appreciated. My work matters." And then that becomes almost this inherent motivation to wanna do more and wanna do better. And I
Mm.
brought that to then my next, role, at a different company, and COVID then began. And once again, you're in literally a life and death situation of sheer ambiguity across the board, both personally and professionally, but you have learned now, how do you kind of keep track of this head piece with the business and what needs to happen, but also really embrace the heart piece with your team. And I think that really was helpful, certainly in managing um, that crisis with COVID.
Mm. So if there's people listening who are surprisingly young, which I'm finding happens more and more in my life. So you're talking about the Boston Marathon. So the Boston Marathon is a very, very well-known marathon race in the US every spring, run in Boston. And there were two bombings that happened near the finish line. And this was back, I think, in 2013. Um,
Yes.
so if you're working with Starbucks and you have two stores there, then this isn't just, oh, this is something that's happening in civilization. This is something that's happening that could threaten us physically, both our
Yes.
team members and our customers. People are freaking out because obviously this is an unprecedented thing. So you're dealing with people in a state of potentially, I suppose I wasn't there, existential threat of, is there going to be another thing? What's happening?
Yeah.
And, there's carnage. I mean, it's stuff that people don't see. I thank God they don't see very often in Boston. And then when you talk about COVID, my recollections at the time, you were leading a business that was caring for seniors, as I recall. You're dealing with vulnerable populations at a time of COVID. So these are two crises that are not some abstract conceptual things. This is on the ground. The people who are your employees and your team members and the people they serve are physically at risk of death.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I mean, this
Yes.
is some serious stuff. I won't say anything that
Yes.
has to be bleeped out, but this is some serious stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
particularly, I can't possibly compare those two different types of crises, but something like a COVID was really unprecedented. So I'm curious to know, from a leadership point of view, with your experience, what were the things that helped? I mean, we could break it down and say what helped your crew and team members, and then what helped, your clients and customers, and perhaps they're the same thing, perhaps they're different. But how does one lead through COVID in a business that is touching on the lives and responsible for supporting the health and thriving of vulnerable populations?
Yeah. It was definitely a challenging time. I think that, and I was new to the company, and I was new to the business, and I was new to my team. And so you had all of it together, but what I really depended on was my listening skills, kind of taking in what I was hearing both from my team, from my clients, from what was going on out there, and realizing, okay, based off of what I'm hearing, what can I be doing to either create a safe environment, create an open environment that people can continue to give feedback and updates, etc. Also, as I'm learning the business, what can we be doing from a business aspect to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as well as the clients? So I would say it really came down to and communication, listening and communication, and consistent listening and communication. And I remember having my first call with my overall field team. So call it a couple hundred people on the line. We were very new into COVID, and I was asked to kind of give an update on the business and some of the changes we're going to need to make, from a structural standpoint during this time. And I remember I first had to introduce myself because a lot of people had not even, met me yet. And, I go through the business pieces. Uh, but I remember asking some of my team members to get involved with the call. And I remember them being surprised, like, you want me to, be a part of the conversation? Yeah, we're all leaders here. Everyone's a leader, right? But here was the moment for me. It was Q&A, and I think people were surprised that I opened it up because you never know what kind of questions are going to come from an audience, especially during a very ambiguous and emotional time. Open it up to Q&A, and someone asked me a question, and I said, "I don't know, but I will get back to you." I said, "Good question. I don't know, but I will get back to you." I heard more feedback in a positive sense about that answer, "I don't know," than I did about everything else that I said in that entire hour. And I was a new leader to the company and to the organization that I was leading, and that to me was vulnerability. That was authenticity. That was, "Hey, I don't know, and I'm not going to stand here in the midst of this ambiguity and claim that I have all the answers." And I think that won over the trust of the team very early on to say, "Okay, she's honest enough to tell us when she doesn't know. I'm all in." So that was a moment for me of, okay, it does matter when you show up genuinely.
Mm. So I'm going to ask you a question that's probably not fair to ask you, but I'll ask anyway. Why do you think that leaders sometimes struggle? Why is it unusual for leaders to say, I don't know, especially when they're sort of under the lights? Is it internal pressure? Is it pressure that I have to know or else it's about them, it's about me?
Yeah.
Uh, what do you think that is? What's your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
I think there's an expectation when you use the word leader or boss or supervisor that you have all the answers. It's just an expectation. And so and I think that goes way back in history when someone gets
Mm.
assigned at a higher level position, then you must know more than I do. And so I think it starts there, and then it can become just internal to that person on how they think they should handle themselves, especially when you get to larger and larger groups of people that you're leading. And yes, you should know a lot. You know, you're in this position of big time responsibility, but you are only human. You don't know absolutely everything there is to know. And I also don't think there's a lot of people out there that feel vulnerable enough to admit that they don't know, for fear of, well, maybe they would question my competence in the job,
Mm.
my confidence in the job, and or my performance. And what I have learned is it actually helps when you show some humbleness, when you show some vulnerability, because your teams will, I think, even respect you even more and trust you even more and probably give you even more to perform.
Mm, yeah. So, yeah. And I hear you. I think it's not whether one is vulnerable, it's whether one is secure enough or confident enough to expose that vulnerability. And I suppose it goes to, is leadership is being in a position of higher responsibility about about having the solution to everything or being able to get to a solution
I
for
love
anything?
that.
The
I
ability
love
to
that.
solve the problem, not necessarily having the answer at the current time, especially as we're in times of exponential change and adaptive change and adaptive leadership, where the problems that we're solving now are not the problems that I had when I was two levels down. Like,
Absolutely.
so
They're much
my
more complex, much more complex.
yes, complex and newer, and sometimes reliant on technologies that I can't even spell or don't know the acronym. But my ability, my asset, my contribution is the ability to solve a problem either individually or more likely collectively than it is to have the answer. But it's interesting if there's a reluctance to express vulnerability, then you're sort of, I'm not really telling people, but maybe they know anyway, but I'm not going to tell them.
No, and I also think, um, being part of the problem solving to create a solution that everyone's a part of makes it even stronger and more sustainable. So when you have all the answers, no one's involved. You're just giving the answers. But when you're, especially, the higher level roles, the more complex the problems become, as you involve more people in that problem solving, everyone has skin in the game to help solve, then there's almost this motivation to, hey, we're all in this together. Accountability, responsibility, and ownership take over.
Mm. Yeah, so now you're talking about the benefits of collective problem solving,
Yeah, yeah.
right? As opposed to the default or perhaps the expectation of individual leadership decision making. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I think there are moments that you need to do that as well. Like, if
Mhm.
we collaborated on absolutely every decision, yeah, we may not get the work done where we need to, but I think there's many an opportunity to involve teams in problem solving, and I do think that leadership expectations has evolved over time just overall, where it used to be kind of this direct tell. We know how we grew up. Your parents said, "Go do this." Why? Because I said so. That has obviously continued to morph. Now you have more conversations, more explanations about the why and those types of things where everyone can learn, why are we doing what we're doing? I've got that. Now, got that. I'm going to work even harder to accomplish that and accomplish that together. So I've seen that change even with the teams that I've led through the years.
Mm, mm. Well, one thing I want to come back to and be sure we unpack a little bit is you talked a few times about listening and the
Mm.
impact of listening and perhaps listening in a certain way. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but is there a story, an incident, or a personal evolution about listening that you could share, please?
Yeah. I got plenty of stories about listening. Here's what I would say, and it goes back to our previous conversation. When you think you need to have all the answers, the listening ears come off. And so I would say early on in my career, I probably wasn't the best listener. But when you start getting exposed to a variety of different problems and things, and um, it really matters to hear what people are saying, to get feedback, to then check and adjust. And I had really a leadership moment, and I would call it listening and probably some other things. When I left from ExxonMobil, I came to Starbucks. ExxonMobil was very um, process driven. Um, it's a mature industry. I learned so much about operations and P&L management. I also was in one of my roles working in construction sites with new locations, etc. So I had built almost kind of this armor, if you will, of I know what I'm doing, I'm working hard, and I'm moving forward. When I came to Starbucks, we had just remodeled a location, a high profile location. The construction team was there, and I had to do a punch list, which means you're walking through the location and you're looking at all the details and making a punch list of some of the unfinished items. And I was with my team, once again, newer to this organization, but bringing in some of my experience from the old. So we're walking around the store, and I'm literally critiquing everything, pointing it out, this, that, and the other. And I was not listening to what the construction guys were kind of walking me through and explaining what they had gone through, what they have done, what the challenges have been, what they had overcome. Wasn't listening. So we go through, I'm pointing it out, and I have kind of my team, following me, and then they start pointing things out, right? I'm feeling good, Hey, we have made sure everything's really, tight here. Not really thinking nor listening to what the construction team had shared. I may have said thank you at the end of the visit. That night, I get a call from my new boss who said, "Hey, I hear you had a visit at the location during the punch list, yes. He said, "Hey, listen, this is about making sure you're bringing everyone along. Um, my understanding is you did a lot of pointing out, you didn't listen, and you didn't show appreciation." So I
Mm.
had the on the spot coaching of, what we really should be doing and how we really should be treating people. I share that because I know inherently how I want to be treated. I even have a sign on my board that says, "Do you want to work for you?" I know
Mm.
this, right? But you get so caught up in how you're supposed to be, listening ears come off, you think you know, and next thing you know, your team's leading like you, and I got called out on it in a positive way. This was a coaching moment, and I took that with me from then on. Whatever job I did, whatever company, that, okay, I gotta listen and then show appreciation, still point out different things, but had I listened, I would have heard some of the challenges that they had gone through. I would have been a bit more empathetic to, "Oh, now I understand." But I wasn't open to that at that time, I think because of our previous conversation of, I'm the leader here, and this is how you're supposed to show up."
Mm. Right. And as I heard you tell the story about things you were pointing out, it was like you were enthusiastically pointing those things out. You
Oh,
were Well, it
yeah.
was your job to point those things out
Yes.
and demonstrate I see those things and those things matter and I know what that means and it has to be completed all of that, it's almost like the numbers, but it's not the numbers, but it's almost like the numbers. We just
Yes. Yes, and
Mhm.
I in fact, there was no smiling. It was all business.
Right.
And what I also learned was, okay, I had a team that saw that. So now they think that's how they should be leading. So
Right, because you're modeling that.
yes, the impact piece is another learning I've had is, hey, however I'm showing up, that's bound to have an impact on how they show up with their teams, especially as you get larger and larger in companies.
Well, I definitely want to talk about impact, but the first question that comes to me when you're talking about again about keeping our listening ears on is what what do we need to keep in mind? How can we, if not ensure, at least increase the chances that we're going to keep listening? What can we
Mm,
do?
I'll tell you what I do is breathe. Sometimes we get so caught up in the daily grind, in the fast pace, and I've got to get to these emails and I have this call. And I'm known to back up my calendar back to back to back to back. And when you get kind of on that hamster wheel, it doesn't give you room to just force yourself to pause. So I've learned if I take 3 deep breaths, ground myself, it does press a reset button almost physically for me
Mm.
to be able to receive more coming in. Sometimes if you're not pausing, it's really hard to go, and I'm listening, you can't kind of bring it, have things come in and also have things come out. I call it auto eject. There's too much coming in, so I gotta auto eject. And so I pause, I breathe. Now, if you talk in general terms, I do think that leaders should encourage just pressing a pause button or giving a bit of room for listening, explaining the value of that and because when you receive more information that's coming in, then you can probably do more with that information. If you're not listening, then you don't get any information, and then you're not actually, being able to apply what you've heard.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Well, sure. Just with the last piece you just mentioned, if my lack of listening limits inputs, and those inputs can be useful in solving problems or at least being informed about what's happening in different places, then that the lack of listening limits effectiveness because
Yes.
there's less coming in that may have value.
Yes.
Um, but I love this point, and I wonder if there's and maybe you've done this and maybe you haven't. I've done this with a few clients, but it's reminding me it's a great support for client meetings. I do facilitate a lot of client meetings, as you know, is as an agenda item. I wonder near the end of a meeting, is there something that you don't think has been heard in this meeting?
Mm.
Before we wrap up this meeting, is there some way I could have listened better or we could have listened better? Is anybody sitting on an observation where we weren't fully listening? Let's raise it now while we're still in the room together.
What I love about that is, 1, it pauses everyone. 2, it emphasizes the importance of listening and the impact it could have. And 3, most importantly, is it's inclusive to those that may be on the more introverted side, that are probably the best listeners, that may not have had an opportunity to say something. And then I'd add a 4th one, which is, it's showing appreciation for the voices in the room. Sometimes, especially in meetings, you get kind of caught up in, let's just get this information, put it into this, let's move this along. Um, but when you're actually taking in the information, you're valuing the opinions, and you're incorporating those into the actual solving of the problem. Powerful, powerful.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and it comes back to this notion that I think we've all heard that every interaction has there's a task objective and there's a relationship objective.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I mean, whether we're expressing it or not, it is because we're going to leave that conversation with something happening with regard to the task and something happening with regard to the relationship. So is that something positive or something negative, something constructive or something eroding? Something we're building upon or something that we're deconstructing.
Agreed. Agreed.
Mm, yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I want to ask you a sort of anything else kind of question. So, just in the time that we have here, anything else about your observations about leadership or that intersection of things that might be deemed spiritual? And you've talked about purpose and meaning and engagement and et cetera, and effective leadership. You've got a lot to share, and I want to give you a little more space if you've got something um, ready to share.
Yeah, I do. Um, I guess twofold. One is, I didn't have an opportunity to share a bit about my background, that
Yes.
which, I grew up in suburbia, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and my parents made a clear choice and decision to move us. We lived in the city, to move us to a district that was known for its education. And it was more expensive to live, etcetera, but that's how strongly they felt about education for me and my brother, my older brother. And early on in the neighborhood, I learned about I was exposed to leadership with both my mom and my dad. My mom was one of the few working mothers. She was the only one on the street, working mom.
Isn't it interesting how aware you were of that?
At a young age, I
You
was
knew that. Mhm.
kindergarten, but how I was aware was my mom was working and I was, staying with a neighbor when I got off the bus, because my mom was working. And I remember her sharing later on when I'm old enough to know how, she felt, how some of the neighbors made her feel about working outside of the home. And for me, it was inspirational. That's what women do, right? And that's what partners do with my dad.
Mm.
So dad's
Mhm.
working, mom's working, and they were both able to show their love and support to my brother and I, and to really, to me, demonstrate I can be anything and anyone. Um, I ended up probably age 6, age 7 saying to my parents that I've always wanted to be a businesswoman. And I didn't really know what that was, but I knew I was carrying a briefcase. I was wearing a sharp suit. I was walking into a glass building, and someone was gonna ask me, "Do I want coffee?" And I'd walk to this corner office. That was my
And you had the license plate.
and not the license plate yet. Uh,
Okay, all right.
Remember, this is my vision as a little kid.
Got it.
Um, what I didn't picture was I was gonna be leading people. I was picturing just kind of I'm gonna be this businesswoman. So going from I'm gonna be a businesswoman to I'm going to be a leader was kind of the evolution. But I would say my parents, brought us up, obviously valuing education, but valuing hard work and how you're gonna treat people. And my dad said something to me. I was in college and I'm working factory work because it paid well over the summer breaks. And my dad said to me, "When you go to these factories, you're not gonna be working in a factory when you graduate from college. I don't think you will. I think you're gonna be leading teams. This is what I want you to take away. These factory workers that may have been here 20, 30 years, and they're still gonna be here when you leave. So respect their work and respect them. I know it's just a summer job to you, but this is their livelihood to them. Treat them with respect." And I use that moment that my dad shared really has kind of carried me because regardless of whatever position I've been in, I go into stores, I go into communities, I'm talking to everybody. I see you, I respect what the work that you do. There's something about that in leadership as well that I wanted to share.
Mm. Yeah, what a beautiful, simple story, and for him to share his perspective like that, and it stays with you. It's beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. One last thing, Andrew, you know, growing up growing up is and being one of the few that look like me. Um, Sometimes you put an armor up. Uh, you know, you're striving, you're working hard, you want to be your best. And it worked for me. I had a successful school years. I had a successful college career. Um, but that armor, I'm gonna stop here. I know what I wanna say.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's just take a pause for 2 or 3 seconds, and
Yeah,
then you just start wherever you wanna start.
yeah. One thing that I've learned, Andrew, as I've evolved as a leader is I used to be very protective of me, protective of the personal part of me, and it was always the professional. I cared about people, but I'm keeping it professional. Relationships, friendships, a little bit of a guard, and maybe that came from just growing up and being kind of the only one and very purposeful, right? What I've learned is you can walk both paths, and it actually makes it easier when the personal and the professional come together because then you can actually be yourself and also lead people. And a poignant point that came about was when I adopted my son. It's now 11 years, and I hesitated of should I share it?
Mm.
Which was a mind-blowing, life-changing moment for myself that I wasn't sure if this was something that even people cared about or did it matter or any of those things. And I was encouraged, by my HR partner who was always like, "Hey, Zeta, people just wanna get to know you, this is a part of leadership." And I was slowly coming out of my shell, sharing different, aspects of myself. But nothing gets more personal than adopting a child, and everyone knows how that will change your life. And I think after sharing that, I actually think I did become a better leader. I had a fuller picture of life and being empathetic, etc. But the encouragement to say, "Hey, you can be a professional and you can bring your personal life, and imagine just walking it in one path." And so when we kind of rounding out this discussion, when we talk about purpose and it being bigger than you, um, as I stepped into leadership roles, um, that type of experience really made a difference in how I lead now. And so that I can bring all of me to work, that I can role model that to others, and I can create a safe space for teams to perform in which they do.
Yeah, beautiful. So your willingness to be more real and authentic and open um, contributes to your leadership, contributes to the depth and levels of contribution of your team. Not to mention, I would imagine, stronger levels of engagement, higher levels of engagement. This is a real person who I'm working for.
Yes, it
I
makes a
respect her.
difference. It makes a difference, and I think people get more, either understanding, motivation, inspiration, learnings when they know that their leader, is a person, is a human. So I think it just brings in the human side. So as we open this call around, you know, purpose and, how do you lead with purpose? That it's not just about the numbers. It is people. It's feeling that that you're working in something that's much bigger than yourself.
Mm, Thank you so much. We can continue this conversation. I hope we do. It'll be interesting to see where and when and how and in what capacity, but I know we will. And thank you so much for your contributions here.
Thank
If somebody wants to reach you, if that's an option, maybe I shouldn't put you on the spot like that, but how could they best learn about you or perhaps contact you?
Yes, you can easily find me on LinkedIn, Zeta Smith. Very, very easy.
Easy is
We'll look
good.
forward to hearing some stories, some leadership stories from others.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Really appreciated the conversation.
Thank you for listening to Spirituality in Leadership. If you want to access this wealth of knowledge and insight on a regular basis, please subscribe to the show. Join the network of leaders who want to do and be better. You can go to the site spiritualityinleadership.com or your preferred podcast platform to catch all the episodes and learn more. Until next time, take good care of yourself.